Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Anna Allred, and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You're welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar will be on August 18th with Sarah Jorgensen on the Early British Census Project. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be giving a presentation on what to do when you see the red exclamation mark, resolving data problem errors in FamilySearch family tree. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history. Somewhat to her surprise, she discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success, maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library and presents at other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Her current work assignments include developing training use on mobile devices. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and the 4th of July. Kathryn, if you're ready, we will turn the time over to you.
Great, Anna, thank you so much. And we're just getting our screen ready here. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today. It's so good to have you with us. And as Anna mentioned, the topic of this webinar is what to do when you see that icon with the red exclamation, or excuse me, the red icon with the exclamation point in it. And that specifically refers to data problems in FamilySearch Family Tree. So let's take a look at what we'll be covering in the class today. First of all, we'll talk about data problems, kind of the basics. What are they? Where do you see them? And what are the types? And then we'll go over some descriptions, examples, and most importantly, solutions. So on to our first topic, data problems in family tree. One reason that I wanted to be clear about this question up front is that the term data problem can seem ambiguous because we talk about data problems just generically, right? It's something that went wrong with the data. But in family tree, they actually use that term in a very specific way. And it refers to a warning about information that is either unlikely or just downright impossible. So here are some examples. You might have a child born when the mother is either too young or too old. You could have a person whose birth date is after his or her death date. That's kind of an obvious problem. And another example is possible duplicates. So where do you see data problems? Well, probably the most obvious place is on the person page, and they're over here on the right-hand side under research help, and you see those icons and then a description of the problem. But they also show up in tree view. One thing I've noticed though, and I honestly don't know the reasoning behind this, is that not all data problems show up in tree view. They apparently are only data problems related to vital information and standardization errors for dates or places. And then also there's another little tweak on the fan chart page, and that is that the icon doesn't show up at all on the fan chart page. Instead, they use background colors. And you'll notice that there is a legend at the top of the screen that tells you what the colors mean. And so the red refers to a data problem error. So what types of data problems might you see in Family Tree? Well, according to this FamilySearch Help Center article, and this is a link so that when you look at the slide deck, you'll be able to click this link and go to it. It's not live in the video, though. We can't make the link work in the video. But this Help Center article says that Family Tree flags 33 different types of data problems. So in our webinar today, we're going to go through all 33 and spend about a half half hour on each one. No, I'm totally kidding. Can you imagine how tedious that would be? So actually what we're going to do is we're going to divide them into 6 categories, and then we're going to address the categories. So the 6 categories that those 33 problems fall into are data entry errors, possible duplicates, impossible or unlikely relationships, fact mismatches, and we are going to explain what these all are, impossible or unlikely ages, and impossible or unlikely dates. So before we get into that, I did want to set expectations a little bit. That today we're going to just review unique solutions, because about half the errors have the same general solution. So we're not going to go through like all 16 or 17 of those individually. We'll just show one example that teaches principles about that particular type of all the errors that fall into that group. And then for complicated solutions, just because of constraints on time, we will give an overview of the solution, but then we'll point you to more information that you can look at as you want to. And so just wanted to be clear about those expectations there. And so now let's hop into descriptions, examples, and solutions. At the very first, I did want to mention, because I know this question will probably come up in your minds if I don't address it right now, and that is, what if a data problem actually isn't a problem? So a good example of that is this one that's highlighted on the screen, where somebody is flagged because their birth occurs after the mother's normal childbearing years, which for FamilySearch is 52 years of age. That's explained in the document that I referenced earlier. But as we all know, it is possible for a woman to have a child later than that. It's not that common, but it does happen. So if you find that the problem that's highlighted really isn't a problem, then what you do is click on the problem and you get this flyout. And if the problem can be dismissed, you'll have an option here to dismiss it. So dismiss only appears for problems that are unlikely but still possible. It doesn't happen for problems that are completely impossible, such as a person being born after they died. That type of problem will not have a dismiss option. Then to go along with that, have you ever dismissed something by mistake? I have. And so how do you get it back if you dismiss it and then you say, oh, wait a minute, wrong family or whatever, I need to pull that data error back so that it's not dismissed? It's actually really simple. You just go to the place where you dismissed it from and you click show all. And then when you do that, you're going to get a screen that looks similar to this. You click dismissed helps. And when you do, you get a list of all problems that have been dismissed. And you just locate the problem that you dismissed that you want to pull back, and then you click undo. And as soon as you do that, the problem, the error warning message, appears back where it was before it got dismissed. Okay, let's dive into our first category. There are 3 types of data entry errors that you might see warnings about. First of all, invalid characters, then non-standard dates or places, and male or female required. Because these are fairly simple and they're kind of, each solution is unique, we're going to walk quickly through each one of those. So invalid characters means that a name contains characters that don't belong in names, like numbers or most punctuation marks. Now, FamilySearch does make exceptions for things like apostrophes in names, because you might have an Irish name like O'Brien or O'Malley, and you won't get an error about apostrophes, but you will get an error about a lot of other punctuation marks. So let's take a look at an example. So on this screen, you notice that James Badnall has a middle name that appears to be an alternate last name, and it is enclosed in parentheses. Well, parentheses, the people actually used to be told to put alternate names in parentheses before the days of the internet, but no more. And so because this name has parentheses in it, then the screen will display an invalid character error. Well, maybe you've had this experience that you've actually tried to enter an invalid character and you've gotten a warning that you can't, and it actually will not let you save a name with invalid characters. So this is really helpful, actually, if you try to do one and you find out, oh, shoot, I can't use parentheses or brackets or whatever. But then you might be wondering, well, how did that James guy get parentheses in his name? Well, the way that happened is that it came from a previous system. So in earlier systems, like we mentioned, users could use parentheses. And so fortunately, these errors won't happen anymore. And eventually eventually they're all going to get cleaned up, right? But for now, you're likely to, not likely, but it's possible that you'll run across these errors where you've got punctuation problems that you've got to, or invalid characters that you've got to clean up. So fortunately, cleaning those up is actually very simple. You just click Edit next to the thing that has the incorrect characters in it, and you just erase the characters, and it's as simple as that. Okay, let's go on to non-standard dates and places. A non-standard date or place is a date or a place name that doesn't follow FamilySearch standards. And you might be wondering, well, what are FamilySearch standards? Let me give you an example. Suppose that I wrote down a date which was 4/1/2000. Well, in the United States, we have a convention that the month is listed first when slashes are used, and the day is listed second. So in the United States, pretty much everybody would read that as 4/1/2000 or 2000, the year 2000. We would interpret that as April 1st. But in many other countries, the year, excuse me, not the year, the month and the day are flipped, so that to a person outside the United States, they could look at 4/1/2000 and it would mean the 4th of January 2000. Well, to avoid that kind of ambiguity and confusion, FamilySearch has decided on certain standards for dates and also certain standards for places. So an example of a place that could be potentially ambiguous is California. So you've probably seen people abbreviate it CA, CAL, CALIF, or they write it out or whatever. But I saw one time where somebody had used CA as an abbreviation for Canada. And so you can see how ambiguities could creep in. And in order to help all of us as users, FamilySearch said, look, we've got to have standards, and these are the standards to follow. And fortunately, it's easy to see what the standards are if there's a standardization error. So let's take a look at that. So here's Mary Hibbert, and she has an error over here that her christening place is not standardized. And notice that next to the christening date, there's a matching red exclamation mark. So these two kind of go together, and we can say, okay, the standardized christening place got a problem there, and yep, here's the red exclamation point. So this is the information that we've got to fix. So again, you click Edit, and you get a screen that looks like this. So I wanted to take the opportunity to mention something about dates here. Notice that the christening date is not standard. It doesn't have the full month, and it is capitalized and not initial capped. And so this doesn't follow FamilySearch standards, but FamilySearch knows enough, the algorithms know enough to say, hey, we recognize that this is the 23rd of November, 1817. So we're going to put the standardized date here, even though we're going to leave the original one here so you can see it. So that the standard is filled in for us, and it affects the search. It means the search is going to operate correctly when searching for dates. But notice that the christening place does not have a standard selected. And the only time I've ever seen FamilySearch indicate standards is on dates. If they do it on places, I've never seen it. So here we've got Gorton, Lancashire, which has no standard selected. And here is the trick for finding out what standards you could possibly pick for this place name. You click inside the field at the end of the place name and you hit your space bar on the keyboard. And when you do that, this drop-down list pops down and it shows you a list of possible standardized matches. Well, you might be looking at that and go, gosh, how do I pick the right one? And the clue to that is that almost all place names, I think I've seen a very few exceptions, but almost all of them will have a date beneath, and they'll tell you when that place is valid. Well, our christening here is in 1817, which falls within this date range here from 1801 to 1909. So that tells me that this is the correct place name, standardized place name that I want to choose. So I click that. And then this is an example of the screen. I did want to point out one thing. I did go ahead and standardize the christening date the same way that I just showed. So I clicked inside the date and I hit the space bar and I picked the standardized date. Notice that when I changed the original to be standardized, that second field that had the extra standardized date in it disappeared. So now we've just got a standardized date and a standardized place. Two ways you can tell if standardization was successful. One is that you'll have a little icon next to the standardized date or place, and it will say standardized date or standardized place right below. So when everything looks the way you want it to, then you click save and you have fixed that error. Now, what happens if you don't see the date or place that you need to pick? And I've never had that happen with a date, but I have had it happen with a place. And so if you don't see the right place name, FamilySearch has made a way for you to submit a suggestion. And so you go to this website here, familysearch.org/research/places. And up at the top, you've got a link that says suggest a new place. And so if you absolutely know, maybe you live in that country and you absolutely know that this is the correct standard, but you don't see it in the database, then you or don't see it as a possible standard, then you can come here and make that suggestion. Okay, the last type of data entry error is male or female required, and this means that unknown has been selected for the sex of the person. So here's an example. Here's Alice, and she has a data error over here indicating that the sex is unknown. So the solution to that is very similar to the others. You just click edit, and then you select that person's sex. So that is all the data errors. Let's move on to possible duplicates. So most of the time when you get a duplicate error, it's only going to say possible duplicate, but I have on occasion seen possible duplicate child or possible duplicate spouse. So what does that mean? It means that a record in family tree may represent the same person as another record in family tree. The reason I emphasize may is that incorrect merges are a major cause of problems in family tree. So just because you see a possible duplicate warning doesn't mean it's really a duplicate. So before you merge, you want to be certain that the two records that you're planning to merge really do represent the same person. I think sometimes people do incorrect merges because it's not immediately obvious how possible duplicates work. But I was talking, I can't remember if I attended a class or talked to somebody at FamilySearch, but they explained that possible duplicates actually works by comparing information. So here we've got a guy named John Bescobie, christened in 1860 in Lincoln, and he's the son of John and Eleanor. Well, there's another record in our little example here for John Bescobie. He's christened the same date, but a different parish, but he's got very similar parents. So the point I'm trying to make is if the two records have a lot of information in common, then FamilySearch will flag them as possible duplicates. But just because two records have a lot of information in common doesn't guarantee that they're the same person. And in this case, they actually aren't. And I've had this happen to me a number of times where by a fluke, two kids were christened on the same date. and they had very similar parents, but they were actually born and lived in completely different places. So we've got to be careful there and say, okay, just because FamilySearch flagged it as a duplicate doesn't guarantee it is, and that I really need to do a little bit of checking. And then a contrary example is that if there is not a lot of information in common, FamilySearch will not flag them as duplicates, even if they truly are. And so a human being would have to do a little bit of research here and figure out whether this guy was really the same as this guy and needed to be merged. And to complicate matters, bad merges can cause false possible duplicates. So think about it. When you merge two people that are not really the same person, the information gets combined that really shouldn't have been combined. So then the system is going to say, oh, this person looks like they were born here and died here and whatever. We're going to suggest this other possible duplicate, but it's based on incorrect information from the merge. So it ends up not really being a duplicate, if that makes sense. So my point that I'm trying to make is it's super important to be careful when considering possible duplicates and just make sure that the two records really do represent the same person before merging them. So this is one of those cases where we're going to refer you to a couple of other webinars. This is a little sneak preview here. It's a little process that you can follow, and I'm not going to walk through the whole thing because we don't have time. But this process is actually in the webinar that I'm going to refer to you on the next slide. So there is a process that you can follow to be reasonably sure that the two people you're looking at really should be merged. And here are the webinars: Duplicates in Family Tree Part 1, Duplicates in Family Tree Part 2. The way to find that, honestly, the easiest way I found to get to the BYU webinar library, which contains all our recordings, is to Google BYU FHL webinars, and then just look for the link that leads to the webinar library. And these two webinars are in that library. Okay, let's move on now to our third category of impossible or unlikely relationships. There are two kind of interesting ones in here: the looping pedigree and the recurring person. So let's take a look at both of those. A looping pedigree happens when a person appears as both a parent and a child for someone. Any of you remember that song, I'm My Own Grandpa? That's kind of what we're looking at in Family Tree when you've got a pedigree loop. So here's a guy named Francis Grant Bescovy, and he has a father named Stephen. Family Tree, when at the time I took this screenshot, correctly showed Stephen as the father of Francis, but he also was listed as Francis's son. The thing is, when this happens, when somebody shows as both a father and a son, or both a mother and a daughter, it turns into a hall of mirrors. And I didn't have there's not a room on this screenshot to show, but probably some of you have seen that, how the loop just keeps going backwards and backwards, and you see a boatload of Francis's, Stephen, Francis, Stephen, Francis, Stephen, and it just goes on ad infinitum. And so the way that you fix a looping pedigree is actually very simple, but a little bit counterintuitive. So here's how you do it. You work backwards from the present, and you find and you fix the very first instance of the error that you can find. So in this case, the very first instance was when Stephen showed here as a son. Now there, remember I said hall of mirrors, so there were a bunch of other Stephens and Francises all back into time immemorial. But going back there, in my experience, just confuses things. And so the easiest way is find the first instance of the error and then fix it. Well, you might be saying, how do we fix it? That is one of those things that it has some probably about 6 steps to it that we're not going to include in this webinar, but I am going to refer to another webinar that talks about fixing incorrect relationships. So this is the looping pedigree. And now we're going to go to the recurring person because both of those are covered in the other webinar that I'm going to refer you to. So a recurring person is similar to a loop, except it's that a person appears in two different places only, and they're not in a loop, but they shouldn't be in two different places. So here's an example. We've got George Edward Lancaster showing up as the son of Ted and Ada, but look over on the other side. He's also showing as the son of Alfred and Anne. And most likely one of those is wrong. As it turns out, when I did a little checking, discovered, as you might have guessed from the names, that this is the wrong one. And so what you do is you, speaking in general terms here, you would figure out which relationship is wrong, and then you would disconnect that relationship. The way you start to do that is clicking this icon. But again, we're not going to go through all the steps of that, but instead, if you would like very detailed steps on fixing both of those problems, refer to our webinar called Getting Relationships Right in Family Tree, and it will walk you through both of those scenarios. Okay, it's time for a progress check. We have covered the first three categories, and we're now down to our last three. The reason that's significant is that all these three have the same general solution. So we're going to walk through these errors and give examples of each one, but then we're only going to do one solution that will teach general principles that are applicable to all three categories. Okay, so fact mismatches, there are two types. The first type is a children mismatch, and the second is a marriage mismatch. What this means, it's not exactly obvious right at first, but what it means is that the other information section, which is just below vitals, includes a no children or a no couple relationship fact. And a fact has a special meaning in the other information section. It's an entry, and we'll show an example. So these facts have been entered in the other information section, but the person has a spouse and a child in family tree, hence the mismatch. So here's an example. Somebody has entered that this guy, Samuel Hibbert, has no children, and there are no couple relationships. So if that is correct, he should not have a wife or children. But guess what? We scroll down the page and there they are. He's got a wife and quite a few children, actually, got 9 children. So because of that mismatch, we've got the errors over here. How do you fix them? This is one that doesn't have quite such a simple solution. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Impossible or unlikely ages. Here's a list of the types of impossible or unlikely ages that are flagged in FamilySearch. So a birth or christening before the father and mother could have kids, married with children, but they died too young. So maybe the child died at 5, but maybe because of a bad merge, they've got a spouse and children. And you realize, okay, if they died at 5, that can't be right. What if they show being married before 12? Very, very unlikely. Although in some very rare circumstances and places in the world, that could be legitimate. So that you definitely want to check that out. But probably 99.99999% of the time, if they're married before 12, there's a mistake someplace. What if the person's over 120? Probably not right. Birth after the mother's childbearing years. We gave an example of that earlier. And then let's look at impossible or unlikely dates. So what if the person is born before their parents' birth or after their parents' death or after their spouse's death, so forth? All these are really similar. They're all errors of dates that shouldn't be happening. They're either impossible or very, very unlikely. A little comment about stillborn. The definition of stillborn varies from country to country. In the United States, it means that a child did not live outside the womb, so they never took a breath. But there are countries where the child could live for a very short time outside the womb and still be stillborn, listed as stillborn, for instance, on a birth or death record. Fortunately, FamilySearch has incorporated those rules into Family Tree so that they can tell by the country what the definition should be. If you have a death date for a child, let me back up there. If you've designated a child as stillborn in the other information section, but you've listed a death date that doesn't fit with that designation, it looks like the child lived past being stillborn, then you will get that kind of data error. So those are the like, shoot, how many that was. I'm so not good at math, you guys. So, but the last three categories that we've looked at, they add up to about 16 or 17 categories. And all of those are solved using the same general principles. So let's take a look at that. The general principles are that you want to use sources to determine the truth. So birth, marriage, death, census, military, wills, whatever you need to consult to determine what the truth is about that person or about that error. And then make the changes in Family Tree so that it matches the truth. Now, that admittedly is a very high level and very simple characterization. Oftentimes, it's not necessarily that simple. You might have conflicting records. For instance, one record gives a certain birth year, the other one gives a different one, or censuses conflict or whatever. But these are the general principles, and then you just try to use your best judgment as you apply these principles. And there is something else that confuses things, and that is, again, the problem of incorrect merges. So you want to look for signs of incorrect merges because they may have caused the data problems that you're looking at. And if you see that they did, then the solution is actually to repair any bad merges and then correct the dates or the places or the relationships. So here is an example. Excuse me, I'm going to take a little drink of water here. Okay. So on this screen, Charles has a data error because his birth takes place after his father's death. He's born in 57, but his father's death is in 55. Now, it might be tempting to just say, well, obviously, Charles is born in 57, so his dad couldn't have died in 1855. But we have to avoid that temptation because it's not always that simple. In fact, there are a couple of different possible causes for this data error. One is that, as we said, Charles' father's death date could indeed be wrong, but Charles' birth year could be wrong. What if the person was maybe typing off an image and they meant to type 52, but they actually typed 57? So the problem isn't the dad's death year. The problem is the typo in the birth year. So that's another possibility. Another possibility is that Charles might be connected to the wrong parents. So what if the current dad really did die in 1855, but Charles needs to be moved to another family of, his dad's name's Samuel, by the way. So he needs to be moved to another Samuel Hibbert who actually did die later after Charles was born. So any of those causes could be the reason that this error happened, and we don't know until we dig a little bit further into the records. And so I just wanted to share with you what I found out when I started troubleshooting this record, this error, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that you might need to do when you see these types of errors in order to resolve them correctly. So the first thing I found is that the census shows that Charles' father was indeed alive in 1861. He did not die in 1855. But little bit of a wrinkle here. Charles' birthplace in the census doesn't match the birth or the christening. It's actually Openshaw, Lancashire, which screams to me bad merge. Whenever you see conflicting birthplaces or death places, there's a good chance that there's been a bad merge. So I looked in the changelog, and indeed there has been a merge, but I need to look further into that. So I actually don't know yet if it's a bad merge or not, but I need to check it out. But the plot thickens. So as I looked at birth records for this Charles Hibbert, he was actually very easy to find in English civil registration. Turns out that his mother's maiden surname, according to civil registration, is Coakley. But guess what? In family tree, he's connected to a mother with the last name of Nelson. Again, that's screaming bad merge. So then I did a little digging on Charles' father, Samuel, and it turns out that he's been merged probably at least 5 times by some fluke, merged incorrectly, I should point out. By some fluke, a bunch of Samuel Hibberts married a bunch of Elizabeths, which actually in England, as you may know, is an Elizabeth is not an uncommon name. So this Samuel, like 5 different Samuels, married 5 different Elizabeths. There's a Nelson and a Coakley and a Kay and a Meller, and I forget the other one. But anyway, it turns out that these bad merges on Charles's father, Samuel, contributed to the error on his page and a bunch of other errors on the other children and wives and so forth. So actually, in this case, what I've got to do, I started doing it, but I'm not done yet, is I've got to untangle all those Samuels that were merged incorrectly and then see what I need to untangle on the children as well. So that, and to be honest with you, this might sound like an edge case, but in my experience, it actually isn't. Very, very often, these data problem errors that fall in this group of 3 that we've been talking about, fact mismatches, impossible or unlikely dates, and impossible or unlikely ages, most of the time, in my experience, those have been caused by bad merges. So when you see those, definitely check out the merging and see if you've got to fix some merges before correcting the information. I will say that there was one instance that I can recall when the problem wasn't due to a bad merge. It just looked like somebody got confused on a source, and the source actually applied to a different person, but the user had entered the information to the person's record on family tree, and it actually didn't pertain to them. So that one was really easy to fix. We just deleted the source or detached the source, I should say, and corrected the information. But that's actually the only one I can think of where that happened. The rest of them have all been due to bad merges. So you might be saying, oh, sorry, just to emphasize this again, I forgot I had this little call out, that the solution, if you discover that there are bad merges, the solution is to repair the bad merges and then correct the wrong dates or places. So you might be saying, oh, repair bad merges, that scares me to death. And if you're saying that, you are totally not alone. It is definitely a challenge, but it gets easier the more you do it. And there are best practices that will help make it easier. So these 3 webinars that you see on the screen talk about either fixing or preventing bad merges. So double trouble, to merge or not to merge, this goes into a lot of detail about how to tell whether or not somebody should be merged. This one was really interesting. This is a case study of a woman named Elizabeth Hepton, where she had a very convoluted bad merge. And this webinar walks through undoing the bad merge and repairing all the problems that were caused by it. And then this last one, fixing sticky, tricky problems in family tree, focuses very heavily on fixing bad merges, and it has some processes and best practices that hopefully would be very helpful to a person trying to untangle, especially multiple bad merges. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. So just by way of summary, we talked about the basics of data problems in Family Tree, what they are, where you see them, and what the types are. And then we walked through all those descriptions and examples and solutions. So I thank you so much for attending our webinar today. And I see that we've got some questions in the Q&A. So I'll go ahead and address those. And then after I get done with that, Anna, I'll ask if there are any questions that we need to address from the chat too. So opening up the Q&A, I see sometimes if a date is missing or not entered, it will display a data error stating that the child was born before or after a parent or a marriage, etc. And to fix this, you need to enter a valid date. That is a really good observation. So thank you. Check the date, and it may either be not standardized or it may be missing completely, and that error may result. So thank you. The person who submitted that listed themselves as anonymous. So anonymous, thank you very much for pointing that out. That's a great thing to be aware of. And then Chris says, what happens if you choose the correct place name, but the wrong dates? That's a really good question. So if you leave the wrong date, it will just stay the way it is. And it could potentially contribute to other mistakes. And so I would say it's a really good thing to fix the date if you can get the right information. So thank you, Chris. They do act independently. If I gave the impression that dates and places work together, I apologize, because they actually don't. You can fix a date without fixing a place and vice versa. But the best practice, of course, is to fix both of those, to state the obvious, right? Chris, thank you so much for that very good question. Okay, Charlene asks, do we have permission to use a slide on a Facebook page to help others who need that information? Charlene, my dear friend, it's nice to see you, or nice to see your name on the Q&A. I assume you're talking about using slides from this presentation, and the answer is absolutely. All of the slide decks that I create, share freely, because we're all in this family history stuff together, right? And the more we can share knowledge with each other, the better off we're all going to be. So Charlene, absolutely, you're very welcome to share, a link to the webinar, a link to the slide deck, a copy of a slide, whatever you feel would help other people. So thank you for asking that. Okay, that is all the questions from the Q&A. And Anna, do we have any questions that we need to address from the chat?
Chris asked, what can you do if you do not want to have the United Kingdom as part of the place standard? And then he also said, I meant the date given with the standard place.
I'm sorry, say the last sentence again, Anna.
He said, I meant the date given with the standard, and then he sent another chat saying place.
I still didn't get that. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, I don't quite understand
it's not
either.
computing. Okay.
But his original question is, what can you do if you do not want to have the United Kingdom as part of the standard?
Okay, good. In that case, what you can do, let me see, I can actually probably demonstrate that. Let me try and get out of here, because Chris, you're probably going to laugh. I purposely didn't cover that in the webinar today, just because it is a little bit tricky. But let me do, since you asked, it's a very good question. Let's go over to Family Tree and I'll show you how that can be done. And you might also be asking, well, gosh, if you do that, is it going to mess up the search algorithm? And I'll show you a way for it not to mess up the search algorithm. So let's go to recents here. Whoops, I went to the wrong place, sorry. Let's go to our buddy Charles. And let's see, if I wanted to, yeah, I think I fixed his in beta, actually. That's why it's not showing up here. Nope, I'm wrong. I guess I did fix it here. So this actually, Chris, is an example of what you were saying, so that if there's a bit of debate, right, over when the United Kingdom actually started. And I have had a couple of friends from the United Kingdom who have said, I do not want United Kingdom to show up for this particular time period because according to my understanding, the United Kingdom did not exist. So what you can do, Chris, is you can leave a non-standard place in this first field, but then you can select a standard from this drop down. So notice that's what's happened here is there's a non-standard place up here that doesn't include the right standard for, I say right, according to FamilySearch's database. I don't want to act insulting or anything because that totally wasn't my intent. But this is not a standard according to FamilySearch's standard. So it will let you keep that, but it will also have this other place. Oh, what I should point out is that what this used to say, do you guys remember back in the original example, I had showed that it said no standard selected. So when you see that, you can click no standard selected and it will give you this drop down of standards that you can choose from. And as long as you choose from here, instead of from the original field, it's going to leave the original field intact. And so that's what happened in this case. And I'm just going to cancel out of this because I'm not going to save it. But Chris, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, please feel free to ask a follow-up question. Anna, any other questions that we need to address? Anna, I don't know if you're talking. You might be on mute if you are.
Sorry, I was muted.
I've done that so many times
Yeah.
at work.
He just said that the date is wrong.
And what is the question? What to do about a wrong date or?
So what can you do if you do not want to have the United Kingdom as part of the place standard? And then he meant the date given with the standard. Oh, so he meant that what do you do if you do not want like the date that is with the standard is wrong?
Oh, okay. So if you don't want the standard date, you want the original one? Chris, correct me if I'm not understanding you, but it's the same thing as the place. So notice up here that FamilySearch has left the original, which doesn't match the standard, but you can choose the standard from here. And then when you go back to the record, it actually shows the non-standard one, but in the background, the system knows the standard so that it is going to search correctly for the standard date and place. Chris, I hope that answered your question, but if it didn't, please feel free to ask a follow-up question. And Anna, I just got another question in the Q&A, so I'm going to open that up. Let's see, Anonymous is giving a brief history on the UK. So they wrote, on the 1st of May, 1707, the UK, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, came into being. And so this looks like it might have been copied from Wikipedia. Yes, it is. So thank you, Anonymous, for quoting that. Says that it was the result of the Acts of Union passed by the Parliaments of England and Scotland to ratify the 1706 Treaty of Union. So I do understand that there are people that still don't like it to say UK. And one of my friends actually, who is English, compared it to saying California, United States, North America, which we would never do. They said that's kind of what UK is, but then other people don't agree with that. And so I'll tell you, my personal opinion has been just to go with the FamilySearch standard. But you can have a different opinion, and FamilySearch has made accommodations for that. So. Oh, Anonymous says that he is Daryl, I think, if I read that right. So Daryl, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anna, any other questions that we need to address from the chat?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I think that brings us to the end of our webinar, and I'll stop sharing and turn the time back over to Anna.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which will be on August 18th, the Early British Census Project with Sarah Jorgensen. same time, same place, and a recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.